Greetings from Cosmos Foundation. The new administration of President Biden is still within the period of its first 100 days. The key personnel are in place and the policies are beginning to unfold. Expectedly, the path is distinctively different from that of their predecessors. After a difficult, the relationship between the United States and Bangladesh has largely prospered over the better part of almost 5 decades now. It has prospered on the basis of strong economic ties and people-to-people links, apart from the shared value of freedom and pluralism that is revered by the people of both countries. At the height of the pandemic, a consignment from Bangladesh of 6.5 billion pieces of personal protective equipment, which is called PPE, was described by the US Ambassador Miller as the first major shipment of PPE into the US. Bangladesh's upcoming graduation from the list of least developed countries has been well noted in the US media, and the Wall Street Journal going as far as to describe it as South Asia's economic bull case. With a rapidly growing middle class, flexible and diverse workforce, and resilient economy, Bangladesh presents an unparalleled opportunity for investment and business partnerships. The country's investments in human capital, as noted in a recent article in New York Times, as well as digital infrastructure, are all set to transform the country over the next decade. I'm also pleased to note US's return to the Paris Climate Accord and the Biden administration's invitation to our Honorable Prime Minister, Sheikh Hasina, to take part in the Leaders' Summit on Climate. In a conflicted world, Bangladesh appears to have no enemies. If a US-Bangladesh relationship can be forged that will advance Bangladesh's quest for development and US aspirations for peace and stability, it can become a model for similar sets of bilateral relations between the United States and others. In my view, this can be best achieved through deepening the direct links between Washington and Dhaka, and display a strategic dimension of our partnership, one where both see each other as partners in search of peace, stability, and growth.
I'm so happy to be able to say that, like America, Cosmos Dialogue is also back. It's an enormous joy for me to be able to welcome Michael Kugelman to this roundtable. He's no stranger to anyone with any familiarity with the literature on contemporary South Asia. To my mind, one of the sharpest intellects in the United States focused on this region. A very warm welcome to all other participants, each one a person of credit and renown in a scholarly sense. Ambassador Tariq Karim, Professor Ali Riaz, Dr. Nina Ahmed, Ambassador Sirajul Islam, who I hope will be with us soon. Now, the impact of the Biden administration in Washington is already palpable. The US has returned to the fold of international relations, rejoined the multilateral system, and reconnected with allies and friends, a bit like the biblical parable of the prodigal son returning to the family. Family here being the global community of nations, where a sigh of relief is audible. At the same time, we sense a burgeoning tension between the two superpowers, the United States and China, which is worrisome. From my perch in Singapore, which is at the heart of the ASEAN, I wish to share the view here, in gist, that the consensus in these parts is that the world is best off when the big powers like the United States and China connect and cooperate in such fields as Anayat has already indicated, climate change and pandemic, which is essential. The challenge to the foreign policy establishment in Washington also is, while conducting the Hochpolitik, the high politics in the global arena, the US will need to be engaged with smaller global actors, no less significant for global stability, such as Bangladesh. Now, our focus in Bangladesh is development. And we believe a bit of help from the United States, such as market access, particularly now that we are poised, we will have very soon graduated from the list of developing countries. At that point in time, we will require the market access, and we believe that that would bring us a disproportionate positive result. Now, Inayat, I think, makes a telling point when he states that the best results, political, economic, and social, can Washington engages with Dhaka directly. For in many ways, we are unique and different from all our neighbors, including India. Now, okay, the way we will proceed is, as has already been told you, Mr. Kugelman will speak for about roughly 30 minutes. Then the discussants will have 5 minutes. We would need to sort of conform to that time limit initially, because I believe there will be plenty of time for discussions thereafter. 5 minutes each for remarks or questions to Michael. Thereafter, Michael will have about 10 minutes to react. And then in the final half hour, we'll have a free discussion across the along the round table. So now I have great pleasure in welcoming to the microphone Michael Kugelman from the Wilson Center, Washington, D.C. Michael has written extensively on Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh in Foreign Policy, World Politics Review, Dawn, and Times of India. He holds a MA degree in International Relations from Fletcher at Tufts, and after graduating from American Studies School of International Relations Service. Michael, you have the floor.
Well, thank you very much, sir. I really appreciate it. I appreciate the very kind introduction, the too kind introduction. I also want to thank Cosmos Foundation for inviting me to participate in this very august forum. And I confess that I had not initially known that I would be given the very high honor of giving a keynote, and that I would be followed with such an impressive array of distinguished discussants, prize both old and new friends alike. So I really am quite pleased, I'm quite honored, but a bit intimidated, so I'll try not to let you all down. I know it's early in the morning in Bangladesh for those of you that are there, so I feel I should try to make a few jokes to make sure that everyone is awake. I can't promise that, but I will do my best to provide some stimulation with some thoughts on the state of the U.S.-Bangladesh relationship. And so my comments will occur in three parts. First, I will offer some thoughts on perceptions of Bangladesh in the United States and in Washington, D.C. Second, I will speak on the current state of U.S.-Bangladesh relations as I see them. And third, I will discuss what to expect for the relationship in the Biden era, the topic of our conversation today. So first, on the issue of perceptions, I think that we must distinguish here between perceptions of officials in Washington and perceptions of Americans, the American public on the whole. I think that this, you would all know this, but Americans, particularly Americans away from the two coasts, away from urban areas, away from college towns, on the whole are relatively parochial in outlook and don't really pay that much attention to foreign affairs, much less to individual countries like Bangladesh. Now, naturally, it's only the countries that are in the news the most, the Chinas, the Irans, the North Koreas, and so on, that tend to register on the radars of Americans, and typically for all the wrong reasons. And certainly there are more positive perceptions among those countries that enjoy soft power and have a strong diaspora presence in the United States. And here I would highlight India, South Korea, closer to home, Mexico. When it comes to Bangladesh, though, which I would argue certainly has soft power, but not on the level that some of those other countries have, and its diaspora in the United States is sizable, but relatively small, about 500,000, I believe, at this point in time. So when it comes to Bangladesh, perceptions are unsurprisingly quite reductive and shaped by isolated major events that take place and put the country in the media's eye. So when there's a terrible natural disaster in Bangladesh and it makes the news, Americans think of Bangladesh as a place where you have these terrible natural disasters. And then during the period of where there was a rash of Islamist extremist attacks some years back, which culminated with that horrific Holy Bakery attack, Bangladesh became known as a place afflicted with a terrorism problem. And that's basically it. That's how the perceptions were shaped in the American heartland, so to speak. But what about perceptions in Washington of Bangladesh? For many of us here in DC who study official Washington's policies toward Bangladesh tend to think that it's a country that is sadly underplayed and it too often falls under the strategic radar. I do think that Washington's perception of Bangladesh has evolved for the better in recent years, and it certainly has come a very long way from Henry Kissinger's infamous branding of the country as a basket case soon after its independence. For many years, Bangladesh has been viewed by Washington as a strategically important country because of its size, its large population, its location, its neighbors, and of course, its economic growth story, which was alluded to before. And so it's perceived as an important commercial partner. And that's not only a perception, that's reality. I would argue that Bangladesh's strategic standing in Washington's eyes really began to increase after the publication of Robert Kaplan's scholarship on the Indian Ocean region. Kaplan, as many of you will know, is an influential public intellectual, an influential American public intellectual. And in Washington, his ideas carry considerable weight. And it's only natural that once you fully appreciate the strategic significance of the IOR, which his work has helped draw out, you would then fully appreciate the strategic significance of the country that sits astride the IOR, front and center. And Kaplan is someone who had published, first of all, some pieces in Foreign Affairs, and then he published his book, Monsoon, that's really laid out this idea of the IOR as particularly strategic space. That said, Bangladesh, I think, is essentially number 3 on Washington's list of most strategically significant South Asian states, after India and then Pakistan. And that's not going to change for reasons I think we can understand. India is seen on a bipartisan level in Washington as America's best strategic bet in South Asia to counterbalance China, while Pakistan has its perfect storm of size, geography, population, extremism risks, nuclear weapons. But as I'll discuss a bit later, a sharpening US-China rivalry and the Indo-Pacific strategy, which we'll get into a bit later, these provide opportunities, I think, to bring Bangladesh into Washington's strategic fold more sharply and more prominently in the coming months and years. So let's now take stock of the current state of US-Bangladesh relations. This is a relationship that I would categorize as boringly stable. That's a good thing. I'm not sure if boring can be used as an adverb like that, but hopefully you understand my point there. This is not a relationship in crisis by any means, but at the same time, it is not one of those really warm, strategic, headline-generating relationships. So in other words, this is not the US-Iran relationship or the US-North Korea relationship, but neither is it the US-Israel relationship or the US-UK relationship. It lies somewhere in the middle. The two generally get along. There certainly are some tension points, but not enough to cause a lot of friction. And so the relationship quietly glides along, pretty quietly, and you don't hear all that much about it in a big way. And given how volatile international politics can be these days, I think that's a pretty good thing. That's not a bad thing at all. So US government messaging over the last year or so, going back to the last period of the Trump administration, has tended to emphasize the multifaceted nature of the relationship with Bangladesh, one that spans defense, diplomacy, and economics and trade. But I would argue that economics and trade really comprise the sweet spots. There's been a pretty strong track record, commercial cooperation in recent years, and I think that our previous two speakers had hit on this a bit. Washington has really wanted to capitalize on Bangladesh's exponential GDP growth since the decade of the 1980s. So, again, I think I'm reiterating what was already mentioned. The US is the single largest market for Bangladeshi goods in the world. And, in recent years, you've had, $5, $6, $7 billion worth of products sent to the United States. There is a trade deficit that works against the U.S., as the U.S. has in recent years sent goods valued around $2-3 billion to Bangladesh on an annual basis. But then again, the U.S. is the largest source of FDI in Bangladesh. In recent years, it's accounted for nearly a quarter of the stock of FDI in Bangladesh, which is quite impressive. And I believe the single largest foreign investor in Bangladesh is an American company, Chevron, which has produced, I believe, more than half of Bangladesh's domestic natural gas. And U.S. companies, more broadly, are the largest foreign investors in Bangladesh. The last major new initiative between the two countries came back in October, and of course, right toward the end of the Trump administration, when you had very senior economic officials from both countries holding a virtual meeting. Anyway, just to reiterate, I was talking before about the last major new initiative between the two countries. It was back in October when you had senior economic officials from both countries holding a virtual meeting. They then released a statement laying out in considerably great detail how to advance the bilateral economic partnership in the years ahead. And there's quite a lot in this statement that came out, from pledges to cooperate on the blue economy in Bangladesh, to collaborations on science and medicine and technology, as well as focus on integrating Bangladesh into the Asia Edge program, which is this relatively new US government initiative, which seeks to promote economic growth through energy security. So this meeting also yielded a new open skies air transport agreement that intends to make progress toward having direct air flights between the United States and Bangladesh. Now, certainly all this said, the economic side of the relationship is in a pretty good place. The elephant in the room, or perhaps an elephant in the room in US-Bangladesh economic relations, is the fact that about 8 years ago, I believe, the US revoked GSP privileges for Bangladesh due to what the US concluded were insufficient labor standards. But you know what? I mean, given how US-Bangladesh trade and the broader economic relationship has continued to pretty well in the years since that happened, it doesn't really seem like the GSP revocation has had a huge impact on Bangladesh's trade relationship with the US or on the Bangladesh economy on the whole. And again, there's still a trade deficit weighted in Bangladesh's favor. Now, certainly security is another key pillar of US-Bangladesh cooperation. There is a pretty strong military-to-military relationship. And this is seen in particular through maritime collaborations, including joint maritime exercises. The last one, I believe, happened back in November, which went on despite the pandemic. Now, finally, humanitarian assistance is another key component of the relationship and has been so. Bangladesh is the biggest source of US assistance after Afghanistan and Pakistan in the South Asia region. Another big issue in the relationship over the last few years, which is a bit surprising given the Trump administration's relative lack of interest in human rights, is the issue of the Rohingya refugee community in Bangladesh. The US has provided a lot of assistance to Bangladesh for its Rohingya refugee population, which of course expanded significantly several years back when you had a surge of several thousand of them coming in from Myanmar. And I believe the US has actually provided more assistance to Bangladesh for its Rohingya refugees than any other country, I believe. Now, let's turn to the heart of the matter, and that is what we can expect for the US-Bangladesh relationship in the Biden era. These days, I think that the best indication that one gets in general about a new government's intentions is by looking at its tweets, right? Now, Bangladesh's recent 50-year anniversary last week gave Biden administration officials a useful opportunity to showcase their sentiments about Bangladesh and the bilateral relationship. And as you would expect, there was a lot of effusive praise from senior U.S. officials for Bangladesh. So, for instance, Secretary of State Antony Blinken, in a tweet on March 26th, he said, quote, "As partners, we can address global challenges together, fight climate change, and promote a secure and prosperous future for the next 50 years. There were other messages of congratulation from Biden administration officials on March 26 that I think give a sense of where Washington may see the relationship going. President Biden, not in a tweet, but a message to Sheikh Hasina, said that he looked forward to working with Bangladesh to strengthen democracy and human rights. He lauded Dhaka for its efforts to help Rohingya refugees. And then Irvin Masinga, who's a senior South Asia official of the State Department, he issued a message in which he spoke of Bangladesh as an important security and economic player in the Indo-Pacific region. And he said that the U.S. looks forward to working with Bangladesh on climate change. Now, back in February, Blinken had a call with his Bangladeshi counterpart, Foreign Minister Momen, and this is, I believe, the first known high-level exchange between the Biden White House and the Bangladeshi government. And according to the U.S. readout of the call, a set of issues were highlighted, and I think these are the topics that will likely set the tone for the bilateral relationship over the next 4 years, or at least these are some of the topics that will set the tone. The readout spoke of, quote, deepening economic, counterterrorism, and defense cooperation, working together to address common challenges such as climate change, focusing on a durable solution to the Rohingya refugee crisis, and highlighting the importance of respect for labor and human rights. Let me highlight what we can expect in the relationship, with a focus on 4 key lenses, which I think will be some of the main frames for the relationship from the U.S. perspective. This is not a comprehensive list by any means. I just want to highlight what I feel are a few key ones. First, let's talk about climate change. We all know, we've heard this so often, that climate change will be a core pillar of the Biden administration's foreign policy. The administration intends to work bilaterally, multilaterally, and globally to focus on climate change mitigation. And it has signaled its desire to do that with friends and foes alike, including China. Bangladesh is one of the most climate vulnerable countries in the world for reasons this audience knows better than I. And the Biden administration knows this, and the American public knows this. The administration has already signaled its intentions to focus on climate change in its relationship with Bangladesh. Senior officials, as I just noted before, have mentioned this in their public comments about Bangladesh. Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina was invited to be one of the 40 world leaders to participate in Biden's upcoming virtual climate summit. And there already is a track record of some cooperation between these two countries on climate change. So I think that we can expect more of this. What form it takes is unclear, but at the least I expect Biden's administration will want to include Bangladesh in major high-level global exchanges on climate change mitigation. Now, climate change is a lens that suggests potential for cooperation with the US and Bangladesh. The second lens I'll highlight is the opposite. It's a frame that may introduce new tensions into the relationship, and that is democracy. Democracy or democracy promotion, like climate change, will be a major pillar of the Biden administration's foreign policy. I believe this marks only the 3rd time in the last 45 years that a US administration puts democracy promotion on such a high pedestal in its foreign policy. So Bill Clinton did this after the end of the Cold War in the early 1990s. And before that, during the height of the Cold War, Jimmy Carter did it in the late 1970s. But I would argue that other than those examples, since the mid-1970s, you haven't had many cases of US presidents wanting to make democracy promotion a big issue. I don't even think that George W. Bush and Barack Obama wanted to elevate it in those ways. But here now comes President Biden and his desire to strengthen democracy around the world at a moment when he thinks it is really struggling, and he's right. This is clearly relevant for Bangladesh, given the high level of democratic backsliding in Bangladesh over at least the last half decade plus, with major crackdowns against the political opposition and any forms of dissent, and with the country, honestly, on some levels, having become something closely approximating a one-party state. And these are the types of developments that the Biden administration will want to call out. Now, I would argue that while the Biden administration will call out assaults on democracy more than the Trump administration did, it will do this more with rivals or countries not deemed to be important to US interests. So it's no surprise that we've already seen the Biden administration publicly criticized China, Saudi Arabia, Russia, Burma, and so on for their egregious human rights violations. But you have not seen Biden's White House call out India for its policies in Kashmir, or Israel for its policies against the Palestinians, at least not yet. So I think that Biden's outrage, so to speak, will be selective, and friendly countries and partners will be spared this criticism. But Bangladesh falls somewhere in the middle because, as I'd said before, it's not a critical US ally, but it's also not a rival. I think this means we could indeed expect the Biden administration to express public criticism of democracy in Bangladesh more intensely and frequently than it will vis-a-vis the situation with India, but less intensely and frequently than vis-a-vis Russia or China. And if there's one specific manifestation of democratic backsliding that this administration is likely to publicly criticize, it's the crackdown on internet freedoms in Bangladesh. Biden himself has expressed a lot of concern about the undemocratic ways in which digital technology is used. His administration has already been willing to go so far as criticize India, its close partner, for its internet bans. So here, I think some of DACA's online crackdowns, such as its use of online security laws as pretext for cracking down on online dissent, that's the type of thing that could come under the microscope in Washington and be highlighted in some critical public comments. Now, the Biden administration's willingness to criticize democracy or struggles with democracy in Bangladesh could become problematic for US-Bangladesh relations. We saw what happened, as you'll recall, with the former US Ambassador Marsha Bernakit when she was publicly critical of crackdowns on dissent in Bangladesh back in 2018 when she was posted in Dhaka. And around that time, when she was being critical, one night she left a dinner party in Dhaka and her car was assaulted by some motorcyclists who threw some bricks at it. It's unclear who did this, or at least it's unclear to me who did this. And it's unclear if this attack was in any way linked to her criticism. But there were other troubling signs too. First, no public figure in Bangladesh, no official in Bangladesh expressed public concern for Bernakit after her car was attacked. Several senior officials actually complained, lambasted her for her criticism of Dhaka's crackdowns on dissent, basically telling her not to get involved in that. Now, if you had that kind of reaction to the criticism of a US ambassador, imagine if that criticism comes from the Secretary of State or a similarly senior person. And we can't rule that out with the Biden administration. And there's another thing to keep in mind here in this conversation about democracy. US officials have long worried that Dhaka's crackdown on the Islamist opposition, especially JI, could raise the risk of radicalization and lead to new recruits for violent extremist groups. And these types of risks are threatening to US interests, given that stability is Washington's chief concern in Bangladesh and South Asia more broadly, and given that these Islamist violent extremist groups in Bangladesh are inherently anti-American. So my point is that these crackdowns and mufflings of dissent continue apace. The implications for US-Bangladesh relations are stark. It could prompt US public criticism, which could generate some tensions, and it also risks leading to outcomes that are detrimental to US interests. All this said, I'd like to just briefly focus on two other lenses, which are interrelated and which I think highlight, even with this discussion of how the democracy issue could cause some tensions, how the US-Bangladesh relationship could grow and strengthen in the Biden era. One is China. There's still a lot that's not known about the Biden administration's foreign policy, but one thing that's crystal clear is that China will be the main foreign policy concern. And the Biden administration's approach to the world, and especially Asia, will be shaped by a deepening US-China rivalry that is here to stay. This means the Biden administration's view of Bangladesh will be viewed through the prism of US-China competition, and by extension, competition between China and its rival India, which is America's main strategic partner in South Asia. The US will want to deepen its relations with Bangladesh in order to counterbalance China's footprint, which is largely driven by the Belt and Road Initiative. Washington knows Bangladesh is somewhat of a key theater for Sino-India competition. It was just the other night, I believe, that Gawar Rizvi, the foreign affairs advisor to the Bangladesh prime minister, made a very telling comment. He said that Bangladesh works with China on BRI. China has a role in Bangladesh because of its development assistance, but at the same time, Bangladesh's most important partner is India. So this, to me, telegraphs this competition between India and China and Bangladesh. Now, one can argue that Dhaka's ties to Delhi are warmer and more multifaceted than they are with Beijing. But clearly there's competition playing out here. And the Biden administration has an opportunity to try to shift the balance away from China and more toward India by stepping up its own engagements with Bangladesh through more maritime cooperation, more investment, more efforts to partner with Bangladesh on trans-regional connectivity projects, such as those under the BIMSTEC rubric, and so on. The fourth and final lens that I'll discuss is that of the US Indo-Pacific Policy. This is essentially the latest iteration of the US Asia pivot or rebalance policy created by the Trump administration several years back. It is meant to strengthen US partnerships with like-minded countries in Asia to pursue a free and open and rules-based Indo-Pacific. And its always unstated goal is to push back against China's security and economic actions in the region, which the US believes to be aggressive and predatory, respectively. Now, while nothing has been said formally, it does appear that the Biden administration will retain this Indo-Pacific policy, though for political reasons, it may give it a new name. I think that one of the key initial questions for the Biden administration when it comes to Bangladesh is, how does Bangladesh fit into the Indo-Pacific policy? Seen from a purely geographic context, Bangladesh is on the margins. For Washington, Indo-Pacific has traditionally been conceptualized as a largely East Asia and Southeast Asia-based phenomenon, not a South Asia-based phenomenon. And the reason for that is simple. From the prism of US-China competition and rivalry, the US tends to accord more strategic significance to those eastern reaches of Asia than to South Asia, because China's actions in Eastern Asia are more threatening to US interests than those in South Asia, and especially in terms of the waters of the Indo-Pacific. China's provocations in the South China Sea threaten US treaty allies. It is certainly present in the Western Indian Ocean region, closer to Bangladesh, but its presence there is perceived not to pose as much of a threat to US interest as what China is doing in the South China Seas. Now, this poses a bit of a problem for US-India security cooperation, given that New Delhi's interests dictate the opposite. China's threats along its border and off Indian waters are more of a threat to India than are China's activities in the faraway South China Sea. And Bangladesh is perhaps in a similar boat. If the Biden administration tries to bring Dhaka into the Indo-Pacific policy, it will have to be sufficiently convinced that developments involving China and South Asia are undercutting US interest. And on this front, I do think that a shift is afoot. Washington has never denied the strategic, for quite some time, Washington has not at all been denying the strategic importance of the wider IOR. As I said earlier, the work of Robert Kaplan and others have made clear its broader strategic significance. The Biden administration, during its first term, was issuing documents, strategy documents, describing the Indian Ocean as the second most strategic ocean for the US after the Pacific. But it appears that the Biden administration is going to rapidly understand the increasing strategic significance of the western parts of Indo-Pacific, seen against the backdrop of China's increasing role there. China, of course, sends a lot of its sea-based trade through the IOR. It has a military base in Djibouti. Its deadly clash with India in Ladakh last year really woke up Washington to the threat posed by China in the broader IOR. There's been reportage lately indicating Biden's increasing concerns about China's development of the Gwadar port in Bangladesh, which of course is part of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, the Pakistan component of the Belt and Road Initiative. So I do think the administration will want Bangladesh to be a part of the Indo-Pacific policy. And even already during the Trump years, Pentagon documents were listing Bangladesh as a key country in this regard and calling for more cooperation in maritime affairs, counterterrorism, counter-narcotics, connectivity. So the question, I think, is what does this entail in terms of operational cooperation between the US and Bangladesh under the Indo-Pacific rubric? Several options here. There are the stepped up maritime exercises and things like that, which I discussed earlier. But there are also options for deploying the tools of the Indo-Pacific policy to Bangladesh. The DFC, the Development Finance Corporation, is a new US government agency intended to provide support for infrastructure projects. The Blue Dot Network is a multilateral effort involving the Quad states minus India, though India has been invited to join. And this is meant to create high quality standards for infrastructure investments in the Indo-Pacific. These two tools potentially can be deployed to Bangladesh for investment opportunities. So I'll bring this talk to a close right now. There is, to conclude, I'll just say that there is scope for sure for the US-Bangladesh relationship to grow in the Biden years, especially through opportunities for stepped-up cooperation on climate change and through Bangladesh's inclusion in the US Indo-Pacific policy. That said, the administration's concerns about democracy backsliding in Bangladesh could inject some new tensions into the relationship, but I wouldn't overstate that. No matter how things shake out, this relationship, driven in particular by economic cooperation, should continue to be cordial and stable on the whole for the course of the Biden era and likely beyond as well. So with that, thank you very much for hearing me out, and I look forward to our discussions, and then I look forward to a discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. That was extremely thorough details, and I like the way you sort of put it in the four lenses and sort of dependence of bilateral relations in the sort of broader milieu of regional and international relations. I think you put across very well, but I'm sure there'll be lots of discussions on what you've said. I would now have the discussants come in, 5 minutes each, remember, this time round. There'll be lots of scope for discussions thereafter. Right now, to use this A, as a reaction to what Michael has said, or B, put your own points of view, and C, ask a question if you have one. I would have much pleasure now in inviting Ambassador Tariq Karim, who has been one of Bangladesh's most eminent diplomats, and for whom personally, I entertain the deepest respects. That goes without saying. He has been, among other things, High Commissioner to India through a very significant period in our bilateral relations. Fine diplomats don't retire, nor do they fade away. So Ambassador Tariq Karim is now rated as a key think tanker with special interests in issues pertaining to the Bay of Bengal, which found reference in Michael's presentation, which has tremendous significance for the politics and the economy of the country. Ambassador Karim, floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, Ifti, for your very kind remarks and your comments directed to me. My compliments to Michael Kugelman for brilliant and incisive tour d'horizon of the state of relations, not just between Bangladesh and US, but the larger tableau in which these are contextually placed, and developments likely to happen following from that. I have absolutely no quarrels or no great quarrels with much of what you have said, and largely agree with much of the analysis that you have laid out. I just have a couple of points on some of the issues that you raised, which you flagged, and I think the US needs to handle this somewhat carefully. I will start with the thorniest issue, the democratic quotient. Right now, democracy is very largely work in progress everywhere, not just in Bangladesh, but also in the United States. If we have a divided polity, very sharply divided, the battle lines are deeply entrenched. It is an equally sharply divided and in polity in the United States, deeply entrenched. Last time I was there, a little over a year ago, before COVID stopped all travels, it was almost like the Civil War was back, except you were not in the trenches and you didn't have your guns with bayonet fixed, pointed at each other. So I think right now, if you were to press very hard on the democratic quotient over here, you would get a pushback saying, who are you to lecture us on this? You have to tread warily on this. We are a proud nation. The leaders are prouder, if anything, and they are riding high now on the success story that Bangladesh has palpably demonstrated to the rest of the world, even to India. Our growth rate has been 5.8%. India's has been abysmally low and poor compared to that. Our HDIs are much better than many of the Indian HDIs. So with all this going, you are likely to get a cold stare, if nothing worse, if you come heavily on the democratic agenda. I will come to the next question, the relationship, the US-China competition, short of contestation in this region that's taking place. Bangladesh is between a rock and several hard places. It's between the rock between India and China, the two major powers, one a rising power, the other established power in the Asian continent. It's between two narratives that come and meet at the Bay of Bengal. It's also, in a sense, it is strategically placed. That's always been my contention, that it is the western span of the bridge that links South Asia with the Southeast Asian region. The other span, the eastern span, is Myanmar. Right now, I see these two spans burning in the middle where they meet. And unless that is put out quickly, my prediction is that efforts at BIMSTEC and cooperation are going into a state of limbo. US assistance to Bangladesh on the Rohingyas has been not only creditable, it is extremely, extremely valued. Without this, we would have really been struggling, and Bangladesh might have had serious problems in keeping on track on its development efforts. However, I think more needs to be done on the human rights issue inside Myanmar. And right now, what's happening in Myanmar, there's a sort of explosion that's taking place. I have, in a recent article I wrote for the Cosmos's journal, tentatively ventured that what are we seeing over there? Is there some likening to the situation that we had in Bangladesh pre-71, 71? Is it going to lead to a situation like that was in Bangladesh in 1991? I don't know. There are competing forces there at work. They are hidden and they're not so hidden. Will democracy, the fact that Myanmar's nationals are out in the streets 2 months after what took place there, despite a very heavily armed and well-trained military and other security forces on the streets, says something. We have still not figured out what. And I think unless this is doused quickly, the emphasis on human rights perhaps should shift more to getting things right in Myanmar in US's larger interest. Number three, the relationship between US and India. You know, after more than half a century, these two democracies were estranged democracies. They were talking at cross purposes. When I went to the US, to India in 2009, I was in the US much earlier, almost a decade earlier. My urging to both friends, Indian friends, as well as the US was, this is the time when US and India need to come together and work together for stability in South Asia, as well as help Bangladesh to get on its feet and stabilize itself on its feet. And to all appearances, that is the public perception. US has sort of relegated the looking after South Asia to India largely. And I think if it has done that, I have no quarrels with that. But how is it going to use its relationship with India, its new, almost strategic but not quite strategic partner, to help and stabilize and develop intrinsic relations internally in Bangladesh and regionally between countries around Bangladesh and around India? I think that is a very important tool that you have, and it'll depend on how you use it. Our relations, essentially, and I've written that, in a sense, we are trying to navigate difficult shoals. So far, we have managed to do it with some degree of success. In fact, more than some degree of success. We have the best of relations with both the powers who are competing with each other, not only competing, they're clashing with each other on the border, India and China. We are also part of both the Indo-Pacific and the BRI. We see no conflict in our being a partner in Indo-Pacific development programs, 5 years running, I was asked continuously at the NDC here, what happens to your relationship with China if you're developing good relations with India? And my answer was consistent, and that's been the answer coming from the highest level. We develop our relations with India. It is natural. India surrounds us, but it is not at the expense of the relations that we have already developed with China. And China continues to be involved in many infrastructure and economic projects. It was also involved in the military, but then I think slowly Sheikh Hasina has been diffusing that. She's been diversifying sources of equipment and trading, etc. So I think we will see that coming to a more even keel, shall we say, in the future. We are struggling to retain our place in the sun with dignity and self-respect from the very beginning. In a sense, maybe, when I look at some of the pronouncements by the father of the nation, early pronouncements, I wonder whether when he stated that, we will become the Switzerland of the East, did he say that just from the point of view of tourism, or did he have something deeper in mind? If you look at Switzerland, it's surrounded by huge powers all around it, but it entered into its state of neutrality a couple of centuries ago, and it has maintained that. And it has, in a sense, grown as a power itself, even though it's still a small country. Did he have that in mind to say that we have all these contesting powers which could clash? Even in the early days when we were beholden to India for so much, he reached out to China and sent a special envoy quietly to China to try and build bridges, even though China had not recognized us. He reached out to the United States. He was very keen. I'm personally aware of that, of the diplomatic moves that were being made. The entry to the United Nations, he immediately said, I must meet the US president. He wanted very close economic ties and other ties with the US. That was his instinct. Unfortunately, in the politics of those days, he was rebuffed. Yes, there were photo op sessions, but he was essentially rebuffed, which made him fall back then on the other powers that were just available. And that was a deeply divided world. So you'll know where that goes. So we have to take all these. US will have to chart its course carefully on this. Bangladesh is not an inconsequential country anymore. That's the point I wish to make. It is a country which has demonstrated that with grit and entrepreneurship and vibrant people who will not be put down by anyone. It has risen from from having been contemptuously written off as a perpetual or unending basket case into an example of success in a difficult world. It's not that it's happened. It's even COVID from 8.5%. Yes, our GDP rate, it plunged, but it plunged to 5.4, which is more than many others can say. All right. We are still consolidating. We have managed to not just keep our population in, I wouldn't say check, but the rate of growth at a reasonable pace. It's just, I think, around 1% or so. And there are challenges. We have to restore our own value chains and supply chains that we lost. And I think we are setting about now trying to right that. We understand that it is necessary now to reach out and establish the value chains extending to our immediate neighbors. The new globalization, as we see it, or at least I see it and many share my views, is going to be a bottom-up process, which will give us more powers to determine our own future and the course, the path that we chalk out for us. And I think in that sense, our relations with the major powers in the regions, India and China especially, are very, very important. Now I'll come to the last point, the India-Bangladesh relationship. It's a relationship that has to be based on reality. I've always said that, you cannot choose your neighbors, but you don't have to love your neighbors or make love to your neighbors, but you have to learn how to live with your neighbors and manage relationship with them. And I think finally we got to that stage where we understood that we can't, even if we employ all 170 million people of Bangladesh and give them picks and shovels and say, cannot dig out into the Bay of Bengal. We are stuck where we are. Neither can the Indians get rid of us. We are stuck in their belly. So we have to contrive that. Number two, events happened in India. I mean, we both were secular states. Now it seems increasingly that we will be an island of secularism deep inside a vast ocean of majoritarianism. And the majoritarianism, which is fed on narratives that existed in the 30s and that have unfortunately been revived. And we have tried to navigate our path through this delicately, but there is no escaping the fact that there's a very strong undercurrent in Bangladesh, which is hostile, critical, or questioning of what India is doing. We've suddenly woken up to the fact about India's actions, not just in Assam or other states nearer to us, but as far away as Kashmir, which was not really of great importance to us after we left Pakistan. So these are factors, and one might say, the Indians did that. This is an internal matter. I pointed out nothing in this subcontinent is internal. Our history of having been together is several thousand years old. Our narrative of being separate sovereign nations is less than 75 years old. We are the denizens of the post-colonial New Westphalian or disorder, I call it, not the New World Order that emerged after 1945. We are still not very comfortable, not very secure in the new identity-based skills that we develop for ourselves. These are still very, very sensitive and raw to the touch. Now, coming back to the democracy factor, and I'll close my remarks with this. I've taken more time than I should, but let me just say this very briefly. Democracy means that there has to be political parties which make it work. It cannot work on a basis where one single party dominates the fields and nobody else has. And I bring to bear my experience in Iran over two postings, one during the days of the Shah in my early career and later on as ambassador of Bangladesh to Iran during the days of the Ayatollahs during Rafsanjani's period for over 4 years. You shut off all, it's a pressure cooker. You shut off all the safety valves, the steam, the outlets. That pressure cooker will turn into a bomb someday. If you can't allow dissent, or not dissent, but just comments coming out from other sources, you're not letting the steam ventilate. What happens is people's resentments don't disappear. They disappear into nooks and crannies which you cannot reach. And in Iran, what I saw happening during the last few years of the Shah, I left in early 72, he had shut down all avenues of any dissent. When the explosion happened, the group or the party or the constituent which was ready to take over came from the mosques. That's one place he could not touch.
Thank you very much. It was extremely profound, Ambassador, and you bring in lots of complexities, of course, but that's the real politique. And nothing is easy. Everything is changing. India is not the same as it was before, and everything is in a state of flux. To sort of reconfigure relations among states and all that in the region and with America, relationship is going to be an extremely complex task. And much of this conversation will, of course, be devoted to that. I have great pleasure now to invite Dr. Nina Ahmed. She is of Democratic persuasion and the US politics. Dr. Ahmed has been Deputy Mayor for Public Engagement for Philadelphia and has also served for over half a decade as President of the Philadelphia chapter of the National Organization of Women. Right now as it's called. She read chemistry at UPenn, where she obtained her PhD. She remains deeply connected to and is actively engaged in Greater Philly and beyond. as has been said of her, she fights for others because others have fought for her. I'm absolutely persuaded we shall see much more of her in the firmament, in the American political firmament across the horizon in the years to come. Nina, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. I hope you can all hear me properly, and I'll put a timer on. First of all, thank you, and I'm delighted to be a part of this esteemed panel. It was a pleasure listening to Ambassador Tariq Karim, and I could listen on and on. It could be a whole other program. But I'm just so happy and encouraged at this 50th anniversary of the independence of Bangladesh, as a Bangladeshi American, to have such a meaningful conversation about how my new country, US, can continue to have relationships with my home country of origin, Bangladesh, and how all of you here have such vested interest in making those relationships work. So I am someone who's a grassroots organizer. So I look to say, how do we make information into action? And from this conversation, I'm hoping that hopefully the US government is going to watch this and see all these minds who have put forth such critical ideas. And I want to thank Mr. Kugelman for doing a great job of giving us perceptions of Bangladesh, the US-Bangladesh relationship, and the Biden era expectations from his vantage point. I am not a foreign policy expert. As I said, I'm a politician now. I'm a scientist turned government servant turned politician. But my first introduction to politics is because of the war that I lived through. The War of Independence formed my political platform in my head that, a ragtag group of people, with great sacrifice, was able to do what is today Bangladesh. And that is a fuel for me for always. And so as a result, I am very engaged in democratic politics here as a result of having watched the father of the country, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, when he was released from prison. I remember that as a child, watching him and listening to him. And those were the seeds that were sown in my head about how do you fight for what is right. And so here in the US, we are facing, as Ambassador Karim said, things are in flux, even though we have finally got a government and an administration that is going to bring us back to equilibrium, hopefully. We still have a lot of destabilization going on. And this question of democracy that Mr. Kugelman referred to, and that Ambassador Karim very aptly pointed out, we don't have our own house in order at all. We had an insurrection on the stairs of our capital, which has not been resolved as of yet. And those insurrectionists were given actual directions from within, from congressional members against their own colleagues sitting in there. So we have a lot of work to do here in terms of our own democracy. And in the US, we are constantly abrogating our franchise, our right to vote. We just passed in Georgia, the state that gave us the majority in the Senate, or the equal status in the Senate with Vice President Kamala Harris to cast the vote to give us majority. That state has been attacked. Its voting rights have been attacked. We've just passed horrible voting laws that are going to abrogate people's right to vote. So when you look at this backdrop against which America, the US, is going to talk to a country like Bangladesh that has struggled against so many forces, so many issues, whether it's a natural disaster or man-made disaster or other forces coming in, we really have to, as Ambassador Tariq said, take a pause about how patriarchal that relationship is. Bangladesh has arrived. It has arrived, the fact that it is going to be removed from the status of least developed country, Bangladesh, and this is just 50 years with starting from nothing, right? So I think my question to Mr. Kugelman would be, there's two things that I felt needed to be discussed is the role of women and how they have driven the economy of Bangladesh, and education. and particularly lifting up the poor. We can only expect so much from our billionaires, but if you invest in our poor, they have a big space to get up, right? So in my opinion, I think we need to look at that issue and make sure that we're looking at how we're elevating the role of women, making sure they continue in the path that they are. And the last thing I wanted to say, again, this is internal and grassroots, is about labor. How are we making sure that labor conditions, I'm a big union supporter. I believe in unionized labor. I believe in organized labor. And that whole dynamic, how we're going to shift that so that people can really achieve a middle class. That's how we've done it in this country. I would love to see how we do it, or how we support that over there to increase, the quality of life of those who are making Bangladesh as strong as it is today. So I'm going to stop here because there's going to be a lot of people talking, but I would love for to hear about how those two factors can be spun into our foreign policy conversation. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for your inputs. And you make two very, very cogent inputs. This is the factoring into the bilateral relationship of A, role of women, and B, the labor conditions. And these would be important social elements which will also, to a certain extent, influence that kind of bilateral relationship. Thank you very much. I have now great pleasure in introducing the distinguished professor of Illinois State, Ali Riaz. Dr. Ali Riaz is not just an academic, but he's an extremely profound thinker on relations between societies, religion, and states. I was first exposed to his thoughts well over a decade ago in Singapore, after the publication of his tome, God Willing, the Politics of Islamism in Bangladesh. Now, he has written prodigiously since and has also been a consultant to Woodrow Wilson, the UNDP, differed in the UK, the Finnish Foreign Ministry, and the Deutsche Bertelsmann Stiftung. Ali, you have the floor. Dr. Riaz.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Chaudhry, for your generous introduction. Thank you for the Cosmos Foundation for giving me this opportunity to share the platform with such esteemed colleagues. And let me try to focus on where Michael Kugelman has left. Michael is a very close friend of mine, so this is the opportunity I take. Michael has put out the four lenses that is going to be expectedly or anticipated. There will be four lenses through which the Biden administration is looking to Bangladesh. These are climate change, democracy promotion, the China issue, and of course, Indo-Pacific policy. I would like to add two more. And I'm completely in agreement with Michael that these are the prisms that needs to be used. Having said that, let me take a step back and put this in context, which all of us in some ways have already acknowledged the Asia before theme, which Michael mentioned, of course, Ambassador Karim mentioned, and all of us know that it might be called in a different name. The Obama administration's Asia pivot is coming back, which was necessary. It was a profound policy that was abandoned by a Trump administration, has practically created the situation which allowed China's rise. China would have been risen, but the withdrawal of United States, so to speak, or absence of it, has created the pathway for China to rise in East Asia, and which has come to the doorstep of South Asia. Bangladesh being one of the places that we are witnessing this contestation between India and China. So that part is given. We know the center of gravity of politics and economy has shifted to Asia and Asia-Pacific region. That's why this Asia pivot is necessary, and whatever name they're going to put, definitely I understand that is going to be the focus. Middle East is not going to be the focus. In case of South Asia, Afghanistan would remain thorny issue for Biden administration. That is for sure. After the agreement with Taliban and given the recent situation, whether the United States can withdraw is a question that would be left there hanging. However, these four issues, the climate change, the democracy promotion, China issue, Indo-Pacific policy, And Bangladesh is going to procure a significant number of aircraft under its forces goal, which we have seen, though it was done at the late stage of Trump administration, that what was described in press as defense diplomacy, that I think would continue. In some ways, either it would increase, it would decrease. I don't know what would be the end product in this process, because we don't know whether United States would get any share on that defense purchase. Likelihood that it would try, and of course, for its own interest, it would try. Will that shape, will that influence some of the other four factors that we are talking? Michael has spoken, and I completely agree with them. And I will come back to this. And the sixth one, related to the China issue. China would loom large in U.S. policy. But it would be different from the Trump administration. The belligerent posturing and the belligerent tone that we have seen, the unilateralism that we've seen Trump administration adopted with regard to China, is not going to be the Biden administration's policy or its actions. It will try to build a multilateral arrangement so that the pressure on China can be more effective, or at least containing China. The policy, which is the United States policy, for understandable reason, can be effective. And that's why Japan is important. That's why, of course, building for more closer relationship with the countries in Southeast Asia and East Asia is important. Indo-Pacific, Australia, New Zealand remains in this equation. So all these things that we are talking about with respect to this China thing. Now, generally speaking, India is seen as an antidote to the Chinese influence in South Asia. Understandable. But given, on the one hand, you are talking about the democracy promotion. On the other hand, India's current situation is not exactly that you can claim that it has remained as committed to democracy. We may call it majoritarianism. The Hindutva ideology is undemocratic. Plain and simple, undemocratic. Let's call it a spade. Hence, when and if a democracy summit is organized, is India part of it, or is it India not part of it? If it is India part of it, is it going to be publicly called out? Which Michael has clearly said, no, it is not going to be. It would be, Myanmar would be called out publicly, Iran would be called out publicly, Saudi Arabia would be called out publicly. India wouldn't, because India is a strategic partner. In the loose sense of the term, strategic partner. Do yell at your partner, and especially when you need. But on the other hand, the U.S. policy towards South Asia, particularly when we're talking about Bangladesh, given the second issue that Michael has brought, democracy promotion, how did Bangladesh ended up there? There must be something went wrong, right? Either US completely was absent, or US was not. Until 2013, US was very much active. If we recall that Dan Messina made a trip to Delhi, pleading with the Delhi with respect to the election, and he was shut down. Practically go back home kind of thing that he was told, and he returned. And then 2014 happened. That is the election, which practically put Bangladesh in the democratic backsliding in a far more way than previous any other incident. My personal opinion is, of course, the 15th Amendment and taking away caretaker government, but on the ground, 2014 election, which United States actually understood it's going to happen. That's why it tried to prevent, but it couldn't. Why couldn't? Because of the lack of influence. Bangladesh is the largest trade partner. United States, not only GSP, in other aspects, military to military, security cooperation. And Bangladesh was facing at that point, 2013, as we all know, is a rising militancy was there. So United States had a very clear stake. If we look at the data that is provided by Freedom House, last year, the worst possible in democracy. COVID is one thing, and also for the last 4 years, the accelerated democratic backsliding. Look at the VDM's data, look at Freedom House. Why? Because the US administration was there, the Trump administration. So having said that, if this policy of containing China by having India and not dealing with India as an issue of the regional importance for its democracy, either they will have to deal it, or they will. Otherwise, if they don't deal it, they are practically undercutting their second agenda, which second in the sense that the way, Michael, you have listed climate and democracy promotion. So I completely agree with you on that. That this is the third administration which is going to do a democracy promotion as a central plank of their policy. So here is this situation. That's why, the question of all these agenda, these two other elements that needs to be added to this. Without that, the likelihood of these lenses, particularly the democracy lens, which Biden administration will have to do it, because unless United States becomes the standard bearer of democracy, given the rise of China, and given that China is not only about economy. This is a misnomer. This is a misunderstanding. Many in Bangladesh also think that Bangladesh is putting, this is a separating, that we are going to get money from China and we're going to have a very political relationship with Delhi. It doesn't happen like that. China's global agenda would not allow that. And the second thing, why the current regime, the incumbent, is having that door open to China is an ideological too. Because given continuously what Michael, you have described as increasingly becoming in one party, or looks like in one party state, that ideological position, if for some reason there is a change of ours in Delhi, if India turns around and gets back to its own long democratic tradition, however flawed it is, it was a democracy at some point. With that, I think these are the issues, particularly the India issue is vital. How United States deal with India has an implication, serious implication for US-Bangladesh relationship. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Riaz, for those excellent points. I think it is an excellent analysis. The fact that the two additional elements that you introduced, the defense relationship and the sort of the pervasive influence of China, which is burgeoning, and the changing nature of the Indian polity. All these are very significant influences in the way Bangladesh behaves externally and how America must design its behavior towards this region and towards the country. Okay, last but not the least, Ambassador Sirajul Islam, thank you for your patience. Floor is yours, sir. Remember that we'll have plenty of time to discuss. What we want to do now is to make those key points and then let Michael react to it for the first round, and then we'll have another round of discussion. So I don't think time over that terrible essence except now. Sirajul Islam has built for himself a stupendous reputation as a top drawer diplomat for Bangladesh. I think not just as ambassador to Japan, though also that, but in many posts at home and abroad. Post-retirement, he has pressed his very keen intellect to the community service by being a prolific writer with commentaries on contemporary issues, both American and Bangladeshi. Now you speak.
On 26th of March, on our 50th year of anniversary of our independence, he mentioned Mr. Ted Kennedy, who in 1971, the Republican Party did not support the Bangladesh movement. They opposed it. Mr. Nixon and his Secretary of State opposed it. But in the Senate, the congressman, the Democrats led by Ted Kennedy, actively supported the cause of Bangladesh's liberation, what it stood for, the genocide of the Pakistanis. Those are, again, very relevant in Bangladesh today. My question to our speaker today, Mr. Krugman, will that America, in the White House statement on our anniversary felicitations to our Prime Minister, it is again 71 that has come about, democracy. So taking a question of Mr. Tariq Karim, America is not Donald Trump, America is not the Republican Party, America is same, where America was going with those fellows. So my belief is the America that we will see from here onwards is the America that will come to us as the soft power. Yes, they have an issue with China. They have to be tough on China. That is different. But Bangladesh is different. Here, democracy has been done away. That if anybody argues, tells me there is some sort of democracy in Bangladesh, what we saw with Mr. Modi's visit last week, we have been asked to stay at home so that we don't come out into the street. That's we are told to celebrate 71 in Bangladesh. And what Modi did, we can't write. I'm a columnist. I can't write. I'm afraid to write. I cannot write freely. I used to write at one time, not too long ago, even under this government. I used to write 5 or 6 columns a week. I dare not write anymore. While in America, I was having procedure. I was in hospital. In between, the doctor asked me, what are you doing, Mr. Ambassador? I said, I'm writing a column. And that was on American politics. I wrote, in between procedures, I wrote the columns. But I can write on Bangladesh. I have so many questions to ask Mr. Klogman. It's true, as he has said, Bangladesh's economic recovery. Mr. Kissinger had said in 1971, it is an international basket case. It's no longer true. But at the same time, one product that is RNG, one earning from the earning of the expatriates in terms of remittance, and agriculture, depending on the vagaries of nature, does not sustain and build an economy. In 2014, the Americans played a fundamental role there. 2014 is a watershed because 2014 is where we lost democracy. This is on the issue of Islamic terrorism, which I don't undermine. It was a very serious issue, but it was over-exaggerated. And to save us from Islamic terrorism, the movement for election under a caretaker government was throttled. And that year we lost democracy. Since then, the people of Bangladesh have the same sort of democracy they had before 71. When Ayub Khan in his Decade of Development used to tell us, why are you worried about democracy? Why are you worried about voting? What is it? We are giving you development. The same argument, believe me, the same argument this government is making. If Americans fall in that trap, if the people of Bangladesh are looking forward, they have taken a lot of heart with this two statements from White House and the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, that America will come up as a soft power for countries like Bangladesh. Talk about democracy, talk about human rights. I'm telling you, again, I have nothing, I'm not political, but in any sense of the term. I'm afraid to write.
Thank you very much. Very well-made points, very passionately. Michael has lots on his plate to react to, but for better utilization or more apt utilization of time, we have 2 more people asking questions only. We'll give them the floor, let them have their questions, and then Michael can react in one go to the whole shoot. All right, I have Hassan Firdaus from the United States. He's a columnist, a writer, formerly was with the United Nations, and he wishes to pose a question to Michael. Hassan, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Fascinating conversation. 2 questions, first to Michael and to anybody else. Going by the analysis provided by Michael, the reconfigured Quad has, it seems, one single objective, that is containing China. In this project, India has been assigned to be the local contractor to keep Bangladesh and other smaller South Asian nations in compliance. But Bangladesh in recent years has increasingly been reaching out to China to create a distance between itself and India. How does the US square these apparently 2 contradictory positions? That's number 1. And a question for Ambassador Karim, and I liked very much his presentation. He told us Muslims in Bangladesh will react when Muslims in India face discrimination. What about the reaction of Hindus in India when Hindus in Bangladesh face persecution? Could this commonality, that is persecution of minorities, somehow be a factor to benefit the minorities in both countries? Thank you.
Shayan Khan is the next one who's going to ask a question. Shayan works with, he's the executive editor of Dhaka, Korea. Cheyenne, you have the floor.
My question to the distinguished panel. Michael Kugelman has already mentioned one of the four lenses through which the US-Bangladesh relationship is being assessed at the moment, which the fourth one being the Indo-Pacific strategy, I think that he was referring to. How much does he actually expect the Biden administration to continue in that vein? Since we do expect, the Biden administration has been signaling a departure away from most of the Trump administration's policies. But on this, we have also heard that on this particular issue, there won't be much of a deviation. Now that it has been 3 months or so since the administration has been in place, what is the sense he gets of how much actually there will be a continuation, or if he believes so, deviation from that policy? Thank you.
Thank you. The transient nature of the Biden administration. Okay, I think we've had a good plethora of ideas which have been thrown up. I just wanted to make one little point of, Michael, you mentioned the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room being the dragon. I just want to say a couple of sentences about how China looks at the world. Now, all of you know as much about China as I do, but for a variety of reasons, I keep tab of it more professionally from this perch here. Thing is, what China is racing to, and I've followed the two sessions, the parliamentary sessions just recently concluded, racing to achieve a peer status with the United States. And thereafter, the relationship will be determined on big power relationship, new relationship, or whatever they call it in Chinese, among two big powers. That is the purpose. Now, in this drive to reach the peer status, there are elements which are impeding on the way. They see India as one such. India does not figure that much in China's global policy. Yes, regionally, India is important in South Asia, etc. But in many ways, China would be very happy to have good relations with India, but does not want anyone to become an irritant on the way to achieving their goal. They too have what they call the Zhenguomeng, the China dream, and that is their China dream. They see themselves as a rising power. They're no longer apologetic about it. They don't want to hide their capabilities anymore, and they see their rising power as a part of the rise of Asia as well. Robert Kaplan, which you mentioned, Michael, I mean, he and I were together in I think Astana, because we are both members of Astana Club. And Robert talks about the elegant decline of the United States, though he sort of talks of the maritime context. But see, all this, we have a very complicated situation. And I just add this because no one spoke not for China, but put China's position in a nutshell for easier comprehension. Michael, you have the floor now. Take about 10 minutes or so, and then if we have a time for a second round, we'll do that. Yeah, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So just sort of reflecting back on what we heard from the four discussants, I'll just make a few comments. First of all, I think all four of you highlighted the democracy issue, and for good reason. I think that's important to do. And a common theme that I heard, which I agree with, is that given that the US is having so much trouble in its own backyard, it needs to be careful and cautious about how it goes on with its democracy messaging overseas, not just in Bangladesh, but elsewhere. You know, I fully agree with that. And, you know, one can argue that this is a particularly salient issue to discuss now, but you know, for many years, the U.S. has, on many levels, suffered from some of the very challenges that it criticizes other countries for dealing with. So it's not necessarily that new, but certainly the democratic backsliding, and some would even argue the democratic collapse that took place in the U.S. over the last 4 years is something that cannot be ignored when you're talking about a new administration that has sought to make democracy promotion a key aspect of its foreign policy. So 2 points on this. I think that if you brought this question up to the Biden administration, they would respond in 2 ways. First of all, they would argue that the Biden administration itself was neither responsible for nor supportive of the factors and developments that contributed to the democratic deficit that the U.S. experienced during the Trump administration. So that would be the first response. And the second response would be that it's not just that the Biden administration is trying to focus on democracy promotion overseas, the messaging that you hear from the administration is a desire to strengthen democracy abroad and at home. And so, for instance, when you had a U.S. Defense Secretary in New Delhi, was it 10 days ago or 2 weeks ago, whatever it was, you heard a lot of messaging about how, the U.S. and India are going to work together to strengthen democracy at home and abroad. And I think that applies in many other cases too. I imagine it would apply to the Bangladesh context as well. And, I had talked about how it's likely that you will have some senior U.S. officials being publicly critical about the democracy situation in Bangladesh. But, I should have said that it will be couched in a diplomatic and subtle way. And probably one thing that you would hear is something to the effect of, well, we look forward to working with Bangladesh to help strengthen democracy in Bangladesh and in the United States. That's a template that you've already heard from this administration in several country-specific contexts, including India. But I fully agree, and I think it was Ambassador Karim that had mentioned this right at the start, that it's tricky, and the U.S. has to be very cautious in how it goes about calling out other countries for the very problems that the U.S. is suffering from. And it's different from Bangladesh than it is from India in the sense that I think both the Indian and the Bangladeshi governments would be very uncomfortable with the U.S. calling them out. But it's different. The dynamic is different with India because you're not going to hear the Biden administration being as overtly critical of India's democratic problems as you are in Bangladesh because of the nature of that relationship, which indeed is hypocritical, but it's something that India doesn't have to worry about. Bangladesh would have to worry about. But that's what I would say on those 2 points, that the Biden administration sees itself as sort of distinct from everything that took place in the United States over the last 4 years because it wasn't responsible for it, didn't support it. And second, this idea that it wants to meld this notion of strengthening democracy at home with democracy overseas. And I should say that, for the Biden administration, its initial policy priorities have been domestic. I mean, we're talking about foreign policy. We're all foreign policy experts. But, Joe Biden is someone that is probably more of an expert in U.S. foreign policy than any previous U.S. president for many years. Perhaps you have to go back quite a long ways to find someone as well versed in foreign policy as him. But his main focus initially is domestic. So the pandemic is the main emphasis right now. But he has tried to take steps to go through the very slow and painful process of strengthening democratic institutions, bringing the country together, trying to figure out ways to reduce the toxicity of public and political discourse. He's trying his best, I think. And, I say this not as a partisan of the Democratic Party, but just as sort of an American citizen. I think he's made a good faith effort so far to try to move, take steps in the right direction. And I think it's anything that he or his administration says about democracy problems overseas will come across as a lot more credible, so long as you see him and his administration making concerted efforts at home to strengthen democracy. That's what I'll say with that. Just a few other comments. With what Ambassador Karim said about U.S. assistance to Rohingyas. Yeah, I mean, it is, I'm surprised, quite frankly, how much of a focus that was for the Trump administration, given that it didn't really seem to have much of an interest in human rights issues. But that will continue with the Biden administration. As I noted, you've already heard some senior officials, including Blinken, talk about the Rohingya issue. It's becoming very delicate because I understand that there's efforts to try to focus on the repatriation of some of, if not many of these Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh. Obviously, now is the worst possible time to be sending them back to Myanmar, given what's going on there. But I think we can expect the Biden administration, to the extent that it can, to try to sort of help figure out how to work that. With Dr. Ahmed, I appreciated your comments as well. You brought up some really good questions, important questions about the role of women and how they've driven the economy in Bangladesh. Absolutely, I think it's no secret that one of the many reasons why Bangladesh has enjoyed this tremendous economic growth story is the fact that, compared to many other countries in South Asia and beyond, Bangladesh has done a tremendous job of empowering women, of educating women, of getting them into the labor force. That's been a huge factor for sure. And I think that the issue of labor issues is also critical. this is something that'll be a priority for the Biden administration. And even in the past, you've had a number of administrations in the US expressing concerns about labor conditions. And of course, this was the reason why the GSP privileges were revoked. This will be a priority for the Biden administration. You know, Biden himself has said that he is not going to sign any new trade deal with any country unless there are clear guarantees on labor conditions and labor rights, as well as along with environmental conditions. So, you know, this will continue. This will certainly be a key issue, and this, like the democracy issue more broadly, you may have the Biden administration expressing criticism about these issues in public ways that the government and DACA may prefer the U.S. not do, but that'll continue to be there. And how to incorporate all of this into the U.S.-Bangladesh relationship? Well, you know, as I and several others have mentioned, U.S. humanitarian assistance and development assistance to Bangladesh has been extensive, and that will likely continue. And I hope that you know, considerations about women, education, anti-poverty programs, that those continue to be a part of that story. As for my friend Ali Riaz, it's always good to see him in these forums. I appreciated the comments he made about the importance of defense cooperation, which I agree with. I think that, you know, his comment about Biden's approach to China, about how Biden may be a bit less belligerent and less nasty to China than Trump was, it's an important point. And this sort of gets to one of the questions that was asked that I'll get into a bit. I think that there's actually going to be more continuity in Biden's policy toward China compared to Trump, more continuity than some may expect. Yes, I think that the major difference is that Biden has made it very clear that he actually wants to cooperate with China in areas where it makes sense: climate change, non-proliferation, public health. So that's going to be there. Certainly the rhetoric will not be as sharp. But, you know, I mean, a lot of people were quite struck by what happened in Alaska a few days ago, when you had Blinken and Sullivan going at it with their Chinese counterparts, which surprised many that thought that, you know, this administration would be trying to be more diplomatic, more subtle, and so on. So I think that was meant to send a message that you know, this administration means business with China. That gets me to the other point. You know, there's bipartisan support in Washington that China is a threat. It's not just a competitor. It's not just a rival, but it's a threat, a bona fide national security threat to the U.S. because of its what it's doing in the South China Sea, what it's doing with technology, and so on. So I think that there will be a fair amount of continuity. I think it was very significant that you had, for the very first time ever, the de facto Taiwanese ambassador was invited to a presidential inauguration, at Biden's inauguration. That, I think, sent a pretty significant message. Finally, just Ambassador Islam, I appreciated his comments as well. And I think that I really don't have anything to add to what he said. I go back to what I'd said about the democracy comments, but I appreciate his comments. The two questions, first of all, from my friend Hassan, it's good to see you here, or good to hear you here. And the question about the Quad, how it's meant to contain China. How does the U.S. reconcile that with the fact that Bangladesh has a good relationship with China? Isn't that a problem? You know, I think the point here is that the U.S. understands that many countries in Asia are like Bangladesh. There are many countries that are both linked to China and linked to the United States or to India. You know, you have many countries that look to China for investment assistance, infrastructure support, but they look to the U.S. for military support. I think that's certainly the case with Bangladesh. It's the case with treaty allies like the Philippines. You have a number of other countries that are on the fence between China and India and the United States. Clearly, for the US, the goal is to wean these countries off their dependence, their economic dependence on China, and get them more focused on Indian and US support. And that's where the Indo-Pacific policy comes in. It's meant to create new structures, new incentives, new tools to bring investments, bring infrastructure projects to these countries. Now, the US cannot hold a candle to what China has been able to do in this regard, so it's got a long road ahead of it. Finally, the question from Cheyenne Khan about how will the Biden administration continue with the Indo-Pacific policy? Yes, it will. As I had said before, you know, there's going to be significant policy continuity on China between Trump and Biden. Indo-Pacific policy at the end of the day is not about containing China. I don't like that word, but it's about counterbalancing China. And that's what the Indo-Pacific policy is meant to do. That's what the Biden administration wants to do. And so for that reason, I think we will see this Indo-Pacific policy continue to be pursued. Again, the Biden administration may give it a different name for political reasons, but I think it'll stay with that policy. And very final point, I should say about the Quad. Another reason I don't like this notion of the Quad being something that's meant to contain China, I think that suggests that there's only security dimensions to the Quad. That's not the case at all. I mean, the Quad, what we saw with that virtual meeting of the Quad leaders, the big ticket initiative to come out of that was pandemic cooperation. And I think that there's clearly a message being sent that, the Quad got started when it came together to provide humanitarian support after the Asian tsunami in 2004. So there's a lot more to it than just containing China. It's also about having 4 democracies come together and try to do things together to bring benefits to the region. Thank you.
Thank you. We are, of course, running out of time, but perhaps we might have just enough time for a minute each, a final 1-finger or 2-finger intervention. If anyone is raring to go, you can have a minute, and thereafter I'll make some remarks and we'll have Ambassador Karim.
Just a very brief comment or in response to the question addressed to me about the nature of the minority politics that's being played out. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. And yes, there is a minority politics and a dimension to it between the countries in the region. There is a minority-majority factor in all the countries in the region, in a sense. It's a question of degree. And in Bangladesh, in contrast with India, the government has made a concerted effort to display that, no, we are treating our minorities right, which is something that the Indians have not done, which has consequences upon how the majority and the minority look at the relationship that's evolving. There have been some clashes. In fact, there were concerted attacks on a minority group or village in Brahmanbaria recently, which took some doing to bring under control. So these outbursts cannot be ruled out. But on the other hand, in India, when I was there and very recently, there was this narrative being floated by some groups that, the rate at which the minority in Bangladesh is decreasing, there will be no Hindus left in Bangladesh within the next 10 years, which of course was somebody countered and said that actually the rate of growth of both the Hindus and Muslims in India is exactly the same. And in Bangladesh, there has not been much of a difference. So, these things will keep coming. It will depend on how the governments handle it. I think there is a marked difference in how it is being handled by the governments in Bangladesh and India right now. And I just want to flag this with Michael. I think how the US addresses its relations with India in relation to India's relations with the other neighbors is going to send a key message to everybody on this side, how to react to that. I think you need to work. They will see whether US is working harder with India to emphasize the same points that they are trying to get across to us. Point number one. And of course, with relation to the Rohingyas, they would like to see more happening with the Rohingya. I'll just stop there. Thank you.
Any more interventions? If not, just before I give the floor to Michael for a couple of minutes, I just want to say about this minority-majority relations in subcontinent, in South Asia. This has been a part of, theoretically, it has been accepted, I think, that minority issues in one another is the responsibility of all. If you date back to the Nehru-Liaquat agreement, this dates back to 52, 53, I think, the agreement was India will look after Muslim minorities in India and Pakistan after Hindu minorities in Pakistan. There being not so much of Hindu minority left in Pakistan, the mantle in an odd kind of way falls upon Bangladesh to balance this. So there was theoretically a sense of this hostage balancing, which was a part of the political ethos of interstate relations in South Asia. I just wanted to flag that point. Michael, if you wish to react to anything after what you have said, if anything has been mentioned that warrants your intervention.
I really don't have anything to add. I just typed in the chat that I agree with what Ambassador Karim just said, that the way in which the U.S. handles its relationship with India, and particularly the democracy issue, how that could impact other relations in the region and their relations with the U.S. Because I know that there's a lot of unhappiness about how the U.S. has always gone easy on India when it comes to the issues of democracy and rights, and particularly now when you've had this tremendous level of democratic backsliding in India. You know, I recognize that for sure, but I think for the U.S., its chief goal with India is strategic. I do think that this notion of shared values, shared democratic values, and that rhetoric that you hear from U.S. and Indian officials, it sounds nice rhetorically, but at the end of the day, for the U.S., what it wants to do with India is work with it. Initially, it wanted to work with it to help the U.S. pursue counterterrorism goals, but now the focus is on enlisting India's assistance in pushing back against China. That trumps considerations about democracy, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you. Two-finger intervention, 30 seconds, Ambassador Sirajul Islam.
My issue on the minority is, there's a lot of problem with the minorities, but India, they have made with their Hindutva, they have made minority their main political agenda. And there, what is happening to the Indian Muslims need not be exaggerated or talked about. Everybody knows about it. In Bangladesh, as Ambassador Tariq Karim has said, there are, things happening. In some of the places outside Bangladesh, there are, sort of attacks on the minorities. But there's another, narrative to this. You would see in the newspapers where news is not of this sort, does not come out very frequently. You'd find on the Facebook, they would tell you, in the civil bureaucracy, the preponderance of the minorities, that is a very important political issue that doesn't come out into the open. So the minority issue in India, qualitatively, is absolutely different from the minority issue in Bangladesh. The other point about the minority issue, I think Dr. Iftikhar tried to tell you, did not make the point completely, is the minorities in India, the Muslims, since 1947, they have made India the homeland. For the first time on the Hindutva, they are being told, no matter how many years you have stayed here, doesn't matter. You being Muslim, either you do Ghar Waspi, become Hindus again, or you have got none. That's official, sort of what they say officially. In Bangladesh, the issue of the minority is a lot economic. But there's other side of it. The minorities are getting a high degree of preponderance in a lot of places. And qualitatively, the people of Bangladesh and all the countries of South Asia, in terms of non-communal nature of the population, the Bangladeshis are by far the most non-communal people in South Asia. So unnecessarily, we are being compared with the minorities in India. Minority in India qualitatively is in a ditch. It does not compare anywhere where it is in Bangladesh. Not that minorities in Bangladesh do not face any problem here, but they also find a lot of favor. And the people like me, or people in generations after me, some of them may be communal, but by and large, our people have the least amount of communal streak in their bones than any population in South Asia. So we should not, when you discuss the issue of minority, we should keep this in view, that the minority issue in India and how it is being handled, and the minority issue in Bangladesh, and the minorities in Bangladesh, they have a definite political view. The Indian minorities do not have, vis-a-vis the other countries of South Asia, they do not have that political view as strongly as they have in Bangladesh.
Thank you. Point well made. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, all good things must end at some point in time, and so must this roundtable. I see Nina cheering that remark about the ending of the roundtable, right? The time has come, of course. Michael's keynote analysis was nothing short of remarkable, actually. And I think America and Bangladesh, in many ways, are remote entities, different cultures, but we like to believe that there are values that we share. And both communities, most importantly, are in the cusp of changes. Now, at this point in time, with this new administration in Washington, it seems to me sometimes that they find themselves almost dazzled by the realities all of a sudden. Like Molke said, that you never your strategy never survives the first contact with the enemy. Or even a bit like Plato's allegory of the cave. It seems that the administration has come out and has suddenly been dazzled by the light of what the reality in the field is. As for mutual interactions, of course, we are driven by common needs, and as we have gathered now, it's much more than that. There are so many nuances, complexities, subtleties, and stark realities, and all this has come through in these deliberations. Modern technology will enable us to package this and deliver the contents to a wider audience for their enjoyment and hopefully enlightenment. Now, each speaker this morning or evening, depending on where you are, has made a tremendous contribution, and each deserves praise. Chairman Anayatullah Khan has provided us, and thank you very much for providing us this platform. Which is the foundation for this kind of stimulation of mind and spread of knowledge. For this, we are very grateful to you. We are deeply beholden to Nahar, who has labored relentlessly to make this event a success. And by George, she has succeeded. Also, the others behind the scenes in Cosmos, back of the stage, as we say, they've done a tremendous job, the seen and unseen hands, and we also owe them thanks and gratitudes. Now, with the substantive deliberations over, I will now give the floor back to Inayat for his concluding remarks. And on my behalf, many thanks to you all. Inayat.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Iftikhar Chaudhry. What an absorbing and enjoyable session. I think this was beyond my expectation. It was very, very enjoyable. First of all, let me thank Mr. Michael Kugelman for his brilliant and incisive keynote address, and very stimulating and thought-provoking deliberations by the distinguished discussants and participants. It's pleasing to note that there is almost unanimous agreement that the prospects are, by and large, brighter, and as long as we play by our cards right, both sides can look forward to benefiting from the relationship in the days ahead. It all shows the importance of rebalancing and recalibrating Bangladesh's foreign policy in the backdrop of fast shifting geostrategic global scenario and vice versa. On some more difficult issues, such as democratization in Bangladesh, we will hope to see greater convergence between the two sides. We especially hope to see the US take a greater role over events in Myanmar, as has been mentioned by the speakers, in order to bring the generals in line, and also a step towards resolving the issues of Rohingyas, which increasingly poses a security threat in the region. And in the context of Indo-Pacific strategy, we would like to see US not viewing the country through the prism of US-China relations and how it plays into that, but rather that it assesses the relationship between Washington and Dhaka in its own right. With these few words, I would like to conclude this roundtable with a very special thank to Nahar Khan, Executive Director of Cosmos Foundation, and her team for their superb support. And I thank you all, and I wish you all keep well, and let's stay in touch. And thank you, and goodbye.
Okay, thank you very much.